Monuments on college and university campuses are facing increased scrutiny, and that scrutiny is raising concerns for our next guest. Shannon Watkins is Policy Associate at the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal, and she recently wrote a column on this topic titled A Monumental Question. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, this is something that we have been seeing across the country, isn't it? That more and more students on college campuses are taking a look around and seeing these monuments and asking whether they should still be standing. Is this something that we have been seeing nationwide?
We have been seeing this nationwide. There have always been pockets of protesters complaining about one kind of monument or another on college campuses. There really was an uptick last summer after the incident in Charlottesville. Since then, there was a national campaign on campuses to either take down or mostly take down or vandalize controversial monuments.
Now, I know part of this is Confederate-related monuments, but it's not limited to just Confederates.
It's not limited to just Confederates. In fact, in the wake of that incident last August, I believe there were several monuments of Abraham Lincoln, for instance, that were vandalized. In California, there was a mission priest whose statue was vandalized. In Louisiana, St. Joan of Arc statue, she was a French woman in a war, was vandalized. So it really does, is not limited to Confederate statues.
Really running the gamut.
Yeah.
Now, one of the reasons for your column is the fact that there's an example of this taking place right in our own backyard in Duke University. Tell us about what's happening at Duke.
Right. Well, so Duke was part of the initial wake response after Charlottesville by having a swift removal of the statue of Robert E. Lee from the entrance of Duke Chapel. Since then, students, staff, and faculty have assembled to create a report that they named Activating History for Justice at Duke, I believe. And the purpose of that report was to document the locations of what they deem white supremacist statues on campus.
And when they say white supremacist statues on campus, what are they talking about?
It's not limited to Confederate soldiers, we know, because they've lumped in Thomas Jefferson into that category. So it's hard to say exactly. They count Jefferson as part of that category because he did own slaves. But I believe the wider issue is that there's a higher percentage of monuments or memorials that represent white men in general. So the issue of identity seems to be more fundamental.
Now, as you have been looking into this and what this group is up to, I know that one of the reasons for writing the column is to draw attention to this and to raise some concerns. What about this issue of people at Duke or at other schools who are looking at these monuments and saying, these are for white supremacists, or these are monuments that we have concerns about? What about that process raises a red flag for you?
Well, several. So the first question was, especially when they started picking on Thomas Jefferson, as part of this campaign of past Duke officials' efforts to uphold white supremacy, that troubles me because there's so much about Thomas Jefferson and his role in higher education and in the founding of this country that I think any student, any learner or pursuer of knowledge should somehow be able to relate to. And so the notion that he's just for white men who don't care about other people is very troublesome to me.
Now, you mentioned Jefferson, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. Are there any other figures, either on the Duke campus or elsewhere, that you've seen targeted that make you say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense?
Well, there's a Southern poet, Sidney Lanier, who is also part of the three statues that were on the one side of Duke Chapel. I believe he was a soldier, though, in the Confederacy. But there are other members of the Duke family who, for one reason or another, fall into that category, whether if they've owned a slave in the past or they exploited people as a result of building the university.
Now, we are chatting with Shannon Watkins. She is Policy Associate at the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal, who recently wrote this column titled A Monumental Question. You mentioned that this group at Duke is documenting these statues. Mm-hmm. Do we know what the group wants to do about them?
Well, it is a little bit ambiguous. They made a video to complement the report, and the student giving the tour in the video says that there have been efforts to remove these statues and much more work needs to be done, which leads one to think that they're not done yet in trying to rectify the past that they deem to be racist. So that's not clear.
Now, from your vantage point, is there any compelling reason to have these statues removed? And if not, is there something that ought to be done either just to clarify the record or to get people talking about the statues? What should we be doing?
Well, that's a good question. And I'm not going to say a 100% yes that they always should stay on campus. I think you really have to take it on a case-by-case basis. I think a better way to approach this issue is to help to reconcile with history by recontextualizing the statue. And that can be easily done by adding a plaque to explain the statue's history, troublesome things that an individual might have been a part of, and I definitely encourage students to learn about those historical figures. Another possible effort that can be done, and it's been done at UNC Chapel Hill, is to add another statue to help tell a fuller story of history, and I think that's reasonable.
So really adding to the record rather than taking something away.
Right. Which I should add, a large part of this report at Duke is to add new statues. I take issue with the reasoning behind why they want to add statues. So
at Duke, is the idea take some down and replace them with others, or keep the ones that they have and then add some others to add to the mix?
I think for now, is this is a start, I believe, of an effort. They want to rename some buildings first, but they really, the large part of the campaign is to add new statues. The criteria that they're using, because who do you decide to memorialize on campus? Their criteria is backed by an ideology that I think undermines the purpose of higher education. That being that students must see their racial or gender identity memorialized on campus in order to feel at home on campus. I believe there are more fundamental principles that all students should be able to aspire to as learners, as pursuers of knowledge, and it shouldn't be reduced to how they look physically.